I guess it's up to 6 or 8 years after the leakage in Fukushima is finally halted. But our March 22nd Fukushima Solutions conference, the last one we did, we discovered that the minimum time it's going to take to halt the cesium, the radioactivity releases from the Fukushima complex is 50 years. So if they're projecting 50, 60, 70 years before that halts, then that means that the West Coast is going to continue to experience a continuing rise in, radioactive isotopes from, accumulated radioactive isotopes from the Fukushima releases. And I haven't taken the time to try to project forward what those levels might actually become. But anyway, there's something to start with. And so this is basically at least the beginnings of a baseline's been established and everything. And with help of the team that's going through, British Columbia, Canada, doing their coastal survey and everything, and the team that's doing these oceanic surveys, we'll be able to get a much better handle on this as time goes by. And then, of course, there's the atomic health strategies that was revealed in the last Fukushima thing. I really think that the population needs to take active measures to make sure that we generally stay, healthy, through this probably next 100 years and beyond. Anyway.
Thank you very much, Farrell Montgomery, for that survey that you did. And I have a question for you, just a second, okay? There were just recent surveys that were taken off the West Coast, some 750 miles to the west of British Columbia and the northern part of California. And Ken Buesler did report recently, he's with Wood Holes Research Institute. They took water samples in different locations, and they came up with the presence of 134 and 137, which would indicate that it's gotten into the plankton, into the food chain. See, what Farrell did was a wonderful base survey, and also he did uncover some very high rates in different locations. And so that added to the overall, knowledge base that we need. And he took, it was over weeks. And how many miles did you travel?
It was about 6,000 miles.
Yeah, okay. I mean, he got out there, and I would email him daily and stuff. He'd be out there. I'm taking a survey, and the police are on me, and they want me to move. And he would keep going. I mean, he is a persevering soul, and he doesn't give up. But also, these recent surveys that were done on board ship by Ken Buesler and others closer in within 100 miles indicate that a large presence of the cesium-134 and 137 is moving towards the West Coast. Our indication would be that it's not impacting in the water yet along the West Coast. But also there's strontium-90 indicating indications in test wells at the Fukushima Daiichi plant right now. Now the difference between strontium-90 and this cesium stuff is that strontium-90 can get into your structure, your skeletal, your bone structure, and when it's there, and you can't get rid of it. So we're talking about bone cancer there. But I want to thank Farrell Montgomery very much for his survey, and boy, he went out there and did a superb job. Thank you, Farrell.
You're welcome, George.
Okay, can you phone up Dana?
Yes.
Yeah.
We possibly are the ones who pulled them into a very, very deadly jackpot. And now that we've done this, it threatens the entire world. So go forward with the information. Spread the word as best you can. And begin organizing an initiative to replace this aging, dirty technology with clean technology that does not disadvantage anyone and it doesn't destroy the planet. As far as stopping the disaster at Fukushima, I'm afraid we're just going to have to ride this one out. Okay? We good to go with our next guest?
Yes. Ready to go. He's the one that did the Vancouver Island survey.
Welcome, sir. I turn the program over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. And so, as the audio coming in, we'll just usually take about a minute.
Thank you.
Okay, good stuff. Hi, I'm Dana Durnford. I'm from British Columbia, Canada. I'm living in Powell River. And what we've done is we've been following Fukushima since it happened, but in 10 months previous to the Expedition for Life, which is what we have organized up the coastline of British Columbia, we covered Fukushima extensively. We covered around 9,000 headlines on Fukushima, and I like to think that we flushed it out really well. In fact, we flushed it out extremely well to the point where I postulated that because of my experience as a commercial diver and working on the ocean, on both oceans, on the Atlantic and the Pacific side of Canada, I had done every industry on both oceans, and I'd done every industry under both oceans. So I come at it from a unique perspective. I have over 7,000 lectures in my collection. That's not counting what I've listened to and watched over and over, but that on the nuclear industry. I have about 25,000 pieces of articles, academic studies. Most of these things are locked up, and so you can only get the synopsis of a lot of it. And so we went up the coastline looking originally in British Columbia. I'll bring up a picture for everybody. I got to flip over Skype, and this is to share the screen. And just take a moment to wind up. And so we studied Fukushima really well. We studied the nuclear industry really well. And it doesn't look like it's going to let me share screens. Let's try that one more time. No, it's not going to let me share a screen. And so I have to try that one more time. It should let me share my screen with you guys. Okay. So I started sharing my screen, and we're just going to wait for confirmation coming up here in a moment. I'll keep on explaining to you the significance of what I think and the reason why we went out and looked at Fukushima under the perspective of looking at the coastline of British Columbia. Well, the coastline of British Columbia, what you see right here, and okay, everything is up. And so I'm not sure if my cursor will show up, but to the left-hand side of the screen, what you're seeing is the outside, the west coast of Vancouver Island. The island is 460 kilometers long, and that's not taking into consideration all the fjords, all the inlets, and the numerous islands. British Columbia in particular has 26,000 islands. British Columbia in particular is right across from Japan. And we have a lot of sister communities where we named parts of our community or associated our community with a sister community in Japan. So we have a strong bond with Japan. We have a lot of boats that have floated over there from the ocean. Now, to put things in a really perspective, I need to give you a quick walkthrough. We had a hard time connecting with everything, and so I don't know how much time we got, but radioactive water reached 3,200 kilometers east of Fukushima 6 months ago, September 18, 2012, and that was the Kyoto. Now you got to take it into consideration that the current didn't just stop. So in 2 months it would have reached 6,200 kilometers. Now the ocean current, the Kuroshio current, crosses the Pacific, say at 5 miles an hour. But if you put into the model at 2 miles an hour, at 5 miles an hour takes around 45 days. But if you go low ball and 2 miles an hour, it takes 131 days. And the problem with Fukushima was there was no end to the plumes coming out of Fukushima. And I equate it with 1,440 minutes in a day. Every minute is the animosity equivalent of 1,000 pounds of radioactive, highly fissionable products and what is known as MOX fuel coming out of Fukushima into the Pacific Ocean. The elements have an enormous long life. These elements from the MOX fuel are considered 2 million times worse than any other reactor on the planet. And you can find all that, of course, in mainstream media. Everything I repeat is already vetted. And I say what I mean what I say in every context of that word, because otherwise I can't communicate properly the urgency and the significance and the grave danger that we all are in this entire planet. It's 8.8 million species, and they ain't got a voice, and we're all in it together. The radioactive water reached 3,200 kilometers. Now you got to realize in 3 or 4 days, the plume from the airborne particles from the detonations, and we'll go down that road a little tiny bit, would have brought over it really fast, and everything would have get washed back down to the coastline. And that's why that little part is really important to what I'm telling you next. Now, 131 days at 2 miles an hour, 45 days at its speed, the corrosion current speed, it's getting picked up and liberated from the ocean through convection and evaporation, and tens of thousands of miles of clouds forming over the ocean every day, as it has for millenniums. These elements are not created by the sun. You won't find them in our solar system in the periodic tables. They were introduced. The elements are 100% man-made. You're looking at around 2,000 man-made that we know about, and there's probably 5 times that we don't know about that are classified. There's around 260 natural radioactive elements that are insignificant, harmless, indigenous, everyday, normal background that everything on the planet is acclimated to, and through genetic superior selection, and has no issues with stuff like potassium-40 is irrelevant, and is a dinosaur apologist tone that's taken to this topic, because 7,500 becquerels of potassium-40 in a drink of water, for instance, I can drink it and I will off-gas your body as homeostasis. So it regulates it like a car regulates your speed with the cruise control, or your furnace regulates the heat in your house with a thermostat. This is the same kind of thing with potassium-40, the indigenous, normal, everyday background radiation on this planet. And everything has that, and I have to apologize for that all the time. But you also have natural uranium on the planet. That's got nothing to do with anything that went through the chain reaction. That being said, Japan confirmed full meltdown at all 3 reactors. Now, it took them up until June to do that. And nobody knows why, because the pictures were evident. And we have over 5,000 pictures, which is over 1,000 nuclear workers have internal radiation, 10,000 counts per minute. And I'm just going to build you a background right quick here, because I know we're pushed for time. Now, over 1,000 nuclear workers, these are dead men walking. They will all die in 5 or 10 years, probably a lot less, because they have such massive doses of the MOX fuel in close proximity to it, and the gammas, the betas, and the alphas. But they were also affected, which is released from the isotope inside the atoms, but they were exposed directly to neutrons and X-rays on top of that. Now, the elements that are created by these reactors, these are now known as breeder reactors. And the elements they're producing are 2 million times worse than any other reactor on the planet. And put it into context, Chernobyl was 1/3 the size. Chernobyl was a 30% meltdown. Chernobyl, they used graphite. Chernobyl, they brought in 600,000 educated conscripted soldiers who had all equipment and all the support. And there was over 600 pilots and helicopters who went in and dropped boric acid on Chernobyl. But it was 1/3 the size, a 30% meltdown of any of the reactors at Fukushima. And Fukushima has 3 100% meltdown reactors on this planet. We've never seen that before on this planet. And I consider that just 1 would be just as concerning as 3. In the context of, I would have went after it just as vigorously once I understood the enormity of it. And so the science behind it is extraordinarily complicated. But 10,000 workers, that's a drop in the bucket. 1,600 workers were later reported to be high. You know, these are dead men walking unless they find a way to deal with it, of course. And the way to deal with it is not to inject them with more radioactive elements that your body doesn't have no natural defenses. And nothing on this planet has a natural defense to any of these elements. No matter how significant or insignificant, an iodine-131 with an 8-day half-life is just as significant as the long-living radioactive elements because they do the damage. But with every iodine-131 reported, there was 10 times more iodine-132 that ionized and radiates the thyroid glands, 9 times more effective than iodine-131. So why did he report on one and not the other one? But there was 30 times more iodine-133. And there was 31 more times iodine-129 with a 15 million year half-life. None of these were reported, just random. 5,000 nuclear plant workers suffering from internal radiation. 40% of the Fukushima visitors. So Japan is devastated. Now, we've covered Japan extensively from one part, and what they're doing down there to the people is an abomination of the human spirit, of the human will, of the human empathy. How can a nation burn its refuge, its garbage, in and release these elements back into the environment and liberate them again? The walls are cracked below the ground at Fukushima reactor. as if the damage above the ground isn't enough to worry about. That is a staggering statement to take away from everything. That means the elements, all the water pouring on it is flowing down through those cracks. And that means the water down below to the liquefaction of the ocean and the water that's coming down the mountain now can find its way up there and mix with the fissionable products. The reason that we have nuclear waste sites, the reason we have terrorist laws is because this stuff is not like potassium-40, it's not like bananas or potatoes or walking in sunshine. These are normal, insignificant, everyday, and we are all acclimated to it. These are Unit 1. Unit 2 is just as bad as Unit 1. Unit 3, 100% meltdown, melt-throughs, and melt-outs. And the fuel pools have atomized and aerosoled, and a lot of that has went down into the ocean. And a lot of it came over to North America. Everything on the west side of the Rockies will wash towards the Pacific. Everything on the east side of the Rockies to the Atlantic and the Gulf. So you 1, 2, 3, and 4. So it's not just 3 melted reactors. Number 4 is an extraordinarily significant player in this game. They had an earthquake and a tsunami. The tsunami came through, took out over 500 miles of the coastline, took out all the infrastructures, all the highways, all your telephone poles, all your natural resources. It chewed up every natural resource they had down there. And of course, the USS Ronald Reagan went in there and they got devastated. They got absolutely annihilated and they couldn't escape it or run away from it. And everybody is suffering legitimate concerns and injuries and deaths and cancers and just horrible, lifelong, debilitating injuries. The buildings detonated. So you throw the rods that were in the fuel pools, which are the coriums. And so the corium's got around 3,450 rods or assemblies. Each assembly has around 80 rods, and each rod is around 18 pounds, and a pound of it can produce enough radioactive atoms to give everything on this.
Hey, tout le monde!
Trop de monde, trop de mouvement, probablement trop loin. Mais grâce au Note 4, vous pouvez toujours réussir votre photo. Le zoom numérique 8X capte chaque détail. Et grâce à la stabilisation d'image optique, la photo est réussie même quand ça bouge.
C'est incroyable ça!
L'angle de l'appareil photo avant est si grand qu'il est possible de prendre tout le monde en photo.
Tu penses que tu pourrais me l'envoyer?
Ouais, mais donne-moi ton numéro par contre, parce que...
Le nouveau Samsung Galaxy Note 4, avec le meilleur appareil photo jamais offert par un téléphone intelligent Samsung.
On peut prendre tout le monde?
Pas avec ce téléphone, mais avec l'appareil avant à super grand angle du Note 4, oui.
Tu penses que tu pourrais me l'envoyer?
Ouais, mais donne-moi ton numéro par contre, parce que...
Le téléphone avec l'appareil photo avant le plus perfectionné jamais offert par Samsung, voici le Samsung Galaxy Note 4.
Over Texas, April the 14th, 2001, and that was because it never stopped hemorrhaging. This particular model is based upon a single release from a single reactor at Unit 1 in Fukushima's prefecture. It's not based upon the ongoing continuous releases. It's not based upon Unit 2, Unit 3, and Unit 4 insidious, unimaginable amounts of releases constantly hemorrhaging into our environment and into our ocean. So what I forecast was that if I went down to the coastline and checked for marine life, because I have a unique background in the ocean, and I had grown up where all I read till I was 21 years of age was the Jacques Cousteau encyclopedias. And so I had fantasy of being a commercial diver, of going out and exploring the ocean. And I got injured doing that, making an enormous amount of money, up to $29 a minute. And of course, you hang a big enough card in front of a donkey and he'll go till he drops, right? And I went till I dropped. Well, I'm back 15 years later, and I went out to the coastline, and this was Desolation Sound, and we covered 18 beaches in 9 days at low tide each time, and we went looking for the 6,500 invertebrates, and we never found none. These are like shrimps, and there's over 6,500 identified on this coastline just by Simon Fraser University. And so we were also looking for 480 species of worms. So each of these rocks should have 6, 10, 12 worms living on them, and underneath the rocks and everywhere around that should be endless, every millimeter, because the ocean is a soup of life. And if you think about it this way, a glass of water has 75 to 100 million phytoplankton into it of salt water, and it has about 1 billion other creatures in it. But the phytoplankton are the basis of the food chain, and they're the basis of the oxygen. 50% or better of the oxygen on the planet. So as we went through the first 9 days, we didn't see anything on the coastline. Now, these are 9 separate pictures I'm showing you of 9 samples. And the rocks are, what you're seeing here is green algae. There's over 600 species of algae total throughout 60 days on the coastline, not counting this first 9 days, but total throughout 60 days on the coastline, we found around 24 algae out of the 600. We found 5 species of sea anemones out of 7,500 that are indigenous to the population of this coastline. We found 5 species of starfish out of 68 species of starfish that are indigenous to the coastline. And none of these were plentiful. None of these, we had to search for these. We took pictures of everything we seen. And what we're finding out now is that most of the species, down to 1.1% so far on the spots we went, and we went into the most wildest places imaginable in order to get the best data. Now, I dove this coastline year after year, and I just want to explain to you how the ocean currents have been around since the beginning of time, since the ocean itself was moving. Before, this current, it might take 1,000 years to make its whole cycle, but there's parts of it, like the Kuroshio current, the North Pacific, that will come right over to British Columbia and America. And so going along the coastline, what we were looking for was any kind of damage, but what we found was everything was missing. And so if these 4 major species you're looking at right now, which is the kelp weed, the kelp cabbage, the world's largest barnacles, and the world's the blue mussels, if they disappear, there will be nothing left on the coastline, out of around 9,500 species. Now, I'm equating this with Fukushima because it's very simple. Everything washes down to the coastline, and the ocean will bring over plume after plume after plume after plume after plume after plume till the end of time, because we're not trying to stop it. We have no technology to stop it, and we don't have the awakening to stop it, and we have been lied and manipulated and deceived through the propaganda machine for so long with potato chips and bananas, walking in sunshine, potassium-40, dental x-rays. Now, if you take a dental x-ray, they turn it on, they turn it off. That's the end of it. You ingest a radioactive element, you got it till the end of time. And your body will attack that with white blood cells and try to build a sarcophagus around it. And in fact, your body is about the only thing that can put this stuff in a sarcophagus. Now, when your body floods itself with white blood cells, what you ended up with was depleted oxygen. Now, of course, this stuff that is coming out of Fukushima is still hemorrhaging out into that ocean. Now, this model was only based up on a single release from a single reactor for just a short period, and was based up on a 6-year permeation of the coast of the ocean. But what has really happened was that we have 3 melter reactors, and that we can't deny that as long as we want to. We can only deny it so long, and then it's going to deny us. And it's denying us the ability to eat stuff out of that ocean. It's denying 2 million people a healthy option. 2 billion people a healthy option that are dependent, if not 3 billion really, that are dependent upon that ocean. But the entire planet is dependent upon that ocean for oxygen. Let me keep going with some of these pictures. Now, the most life we found was on the inside, but I'll get to that in a moment. All of the piers and the pilings at all of the ferry terminals are naked in British Columbia. There's some mussels and a few barnacles left, but if they disappear, they surely will be naked. Now, normally that pier and every pilot in British Columbia would be covered what I describe as a white sea anemone. There's 78 species of them, and there's like the white one also has a gray and a brown in its same family. So there's many different species just of the sea anemones, and they can clone themselves. And so if you tore them up and stuck them on the wharf, they would grow. But for some reason, they're not growing, and we can't find them on the shoreline. Now, normally when I go up to a coastline, and I spent over 14,000 hours underwater as a commercial diver, and I ran the best operations in Canada, bar nothing, on boat ocean, bar nothing. I was also spending over 315 days a year on the ocean, and trips back to back at over 100 days. I didn't do it for the money, yes I did, but I done it because I really truly loved it, and I understood it wouldn't last forever. And the divers can only pick about 2% of the entire coastline because of the restrictions of tables, of currents, of life itself. But the entire ocean, I have always equated it with, you can go around the coastline of British Columbia and pick life for protein and feed the entire planet. from anywhere on this coastline, you can set up shop and just take a select amount, and it would just repopulate itself because the ocean is the soup of life. But as you can see in all my pictures that are coming up, the ocean didn't repopulate itself. It didn't reseed itself. Now, a healthy ocean should go down, plow the ocean in, and all the life will come up from deeper and around the edges, and then all the microscopic life living in all the sea and all the eggs and larvae that's in the ocean would seed every opportunity and everything it got. The ocean is truly a soup of life. It was. You could go anywhere in the ocean, take out a sample from any depth of the ocean, be full of life. Truly a soup of life. Something that is totally unimaginable. We have our own space here right on the planet, and we've only explored about 2% of the ocean. But none of the pylons, excuse the, that's a little bit loud on my end, none of the pylons in any of the wharves in British Columbia got white sea anemones on it. That is staggering. None of the shoreline, none of the rocks, and I always look at the rocks looking for white sea anemones on the rocks going into a shoreline because the white sea anemones were easy to spot and they would be everywhere. And now, we're in shallow water, slow her down. Well, now you have to look for rocks. That's a total different game being on the ocean. I just spent 60 days out there. And here's your typical shoreline right along Canada. This is unbelievable and inconceivable and unimaginable to someone like myself who understood so well. That's why I love the ocean so much. It was literally nothing but life everywhere you went. It was just fantastic. And you could barely find a shell. You could barely find a shell. So this must have happened originally way back after the accident, shortly after the accident. The fall out washing back down to the coastline is just my opinion. But I have covered 9,000 headlines, and I'm entitled to my opinion. I also have done every industry in both oceans. Relentlessly, I loved it. I couldn't think of nothing else in my lifetime. Now this is all different pictures of different beaches, and they're all naked, and you will see the kelp cabbage is what you're seeing there. This picture was zoomed in on a ferry. We took the ferry over to Gibson, where Molly Reach, where beachcombers were shot to, and we went down that coastline. And then so we covered around 200 kilometers originally in 9 days at low tide. And all we seen was the kelp cabbage and the mussels. Now, I'll get rid of that one, come back over to the cover on Fukushima building. Now I want you to understand something about Fukushima. This is unit 1. It was a 100% meltdown, melt through and melt out, and the fuel pool is missing. It's missing. They can't get in there and do anything. And so they built a sarcophagus around it and dropped it down with cranes. And so then they brought in pylons, and the pylons would slip over the crane, over the Kevlar, that's a Kevlar slide, a Kevlar panel that they're going to drop over with hooks, and no one goes up there with a wrench in their hand. You never seen anybody with cutting torches. You won't see anybody with scaffold repairing anything, and that's why they're building that sarcophagus around it with all these panels, because they can't get in and do anything. And so they're trying to contain the flow of it coming out, but they still have to vent it up the chimneys that are behind it, but at least the workers are not being annihilated at a phenomenal rate. They're running out of the homeless and the destitute and the most vulnerable, because that is who is working there. And that's why it is incumbent upon us, and we are obligated. These are the homeless. These are on titanium and lead floors that were brought in by the cranes, and they're working on that. And these people will all be kicked loose when they complain or start bleeding, and they will die a terrible death, and there will be no accountability and nobody to call them the hero. I mean, this building is Unit 4. It's totally destroyed. You can see that. Now, this is what they say Unit 4 looks like on the inside. Look at the roof, look at the walls. And so I have my doubts about that existing in that building. And so I feel very strongly about that is a distraction from the 100% meltdowns. As you can see, they built the sarcophagus. They built a support network that don't touch the building up and across it, and allegedly they're going to put a crane in it, and the crane will reach down and take fuel out, but they haven't done that yet. And so how can they get in there? And the next question is, why would they have to do all of that if it was like that on the inside? Because these are the official pictures from TEPCO. So if everything was hunky-dory, they wouldn't need the crane above it, because there's a crane right there. So why build the fantasy? Well, they got something to hide, obviously. Look at the homeless getting their x-rays and neutrons. And that's because you won't see any scientist from North America going in there and doing that. Now the studies, Dr. Raymond Gilmedy from Loveless, New Mexico, Respiratory Research Institute, he done experiments on beagle puppies and dogs. And so he showed definitively what these radioactive elements can do to you, and he done 84 peer-reviewed studies. In 2000, he got the Distinguished Scientific Achievement Award for killing beagles and dogs with plutonium and americium-241. This is where they trying to decontaminate the dogs. I'm just going to jump ahead.
On peut prendre tout le monde?
Pas avec ce téléphone, mais avec l'appareil avant à super grand angle du Note 4, oui.
Tu penses que tu pourrais me l'envoyer?
Ouais, mais donne-moi ton numéro par contre, parce
Ok.
que...
Le téléphone avec l'appareil photo avant le plus perfectionné jamais offert par Samsung, voici le Samsung Galaxy Note 4.
T'aimes ce stylet?
J'en raffole.
T'en raffoles vraiment?
En effet, elle en raffole. Et saviez-vous qu'il permet de transformer l'écriture manuscrite en texte? Ou encore papa en papa moustachu? Il peut même vous aider à trouver un costume pour une fête. Désolé, l'ami.
Aucune chance que je porte ça.
Oui, il le faut.
Tu l'utilises beaucoup, ça?
Ah oui, tout le temps.
C'est comme une baguette magique.
Dans ce cas, abracadabra. Faites tout avec plus de rapidité et de facilité grâce au nouveau stylet S Pen plus puissant et exclusif au Galaxy Note 4.
I'm not worried about them, not that I don't consider that, but that the title pools, the nursery that I cover, just sorry, Richard. Oh well, we'll get it. It'll disappear. And what's going on here is that he showed definitively for 35 years, even the tiniest doses of these radioactive man-made ionized elements would cause serious cancers and autoimmune deficiencies in mammals. So to me, that is definitive. That's all I really truly would worry about when it comes to is those types of studies. Forever and ever and ever, we have been told, like a Geiger counter can't find potassium-40, you won't find it in a banana, you have to dry it up and weigh it. So they usually take a cubic meter of water, dry it up, then weigh out by grams of potassium-40, and that's how they know how much potassium-40 is in your drinking water. It's harmless. It's in your clothing, it's in all your food. But that is a misleading thing that has been going on for 70 years and really needs to stop, because we can't have a debate when people think that is true, that it's no more worse than a banana or a potato chip or anything else. And so banana is good for you. A banana has nothing to do with radiation ionized elements. And when people tell you that, then you have to disregard a lot of things. But you still got to seek the truth. And the truth is that Dr. Raymond Gilmedy proved definitively what the cancer is going to do. And so the experts say you can't be changed and you can't be stopped, but I say different. I say we do 4,300 peer-reviewed academic studies in North America every day, and that we could easily change a lot of these equations for the better. And why don't we? If we had a big meteorite coming at our planet, and I think we do, radioactive iodine-131 Pennsylvania rainwater samples over 3,000% of the federal drinking water standard. There is no standard for the iodine-131. But if you had iodine-131, every other element was there. And so I'm showing you definitively that all the elements were certainly here. And so then the damage that we're talking about is Fukushima. And so these pictures I'm going to show you right now are all taken along the coastline. We can just jump on any one. It doesn't really matter. And I'll just click on Browning's Pass. Now this was the trip I went out myself. I went out to Browning's Pass. And it was early morning, and that's a GPS shot. And I take GPS shots of everything I'm doing and everywhere I'm going. Right there I happen to have my finger on the trigger. And we're going to boot ahead to the daylight when it got daylight. My doggy is actually doing that on her own, believe it or not. But here's the shoreline now. This was the only time we've seen white sea anemones out of the water. Browning's Pass is considered one of the top 10 diving destinations on the planet, and it had the most life we've seen anywhere in British Columbia, but it didn't have around 9,500 species. It only had around 27, 28. And so most of the coastline has been stripped, completely stripped, and it can't reseed itself for some reason. Browning's Pass, now these little white baby sea anemones are about the size of your pinky. I didn't see any adults. And I didn't see any adults whatsoever, but I got underwater footage, a lot of underwater footage that we haven't uploaded. We did find some up in that area, but we didn't find 500 in a square meter anywhere that is normal to the coastline, the entire coastline. We didn't find any down on the outside, west side towards Victoria. We didn't find any up the inside or any up through Desolation Sound. And we did find some up in Johnson Strait. Now, but this is important because why didn't I find adults out of the water here? I only found baby. Well, it's the top 10 diving destination on the planet. There's all kinds of marine biologists and researchers out there all the time. And most likely that was seeded, because why wouldn't you seed adults? How can you have babies out of the water and not have adults out of the water? Is highly suspect to someone like myself who spent his entire life on the ocean or in the ocean. Once again, it's just a handful of species. Besides them, if the green kelp, if the kelp cabbage, the kelp weed, the barnacles, the large barnacles only, which that's all is there, and the large mussels only, that's all that was there, disappeared, there won't be nothing there, only those little white sea anemones. And so it's very bleak, it's very serious, and what we are doing is we're going up the coastline. We covered roughly around 1,200 kilometers of coastline. It's an arduous, it's a methodical job. It's very difficult. It's very expensive. It's very hard to get the bandwidth. So over the last number of days at the nuclearproctologist.org, I have uploaded all the pictures from day 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18. And I've done that because I'm coming backwards from when we had the crew together. The next days, and this day included, was when I was by myself. Now, we're going to cover around 8,000 kilometers of the coastline because I want to but I want to prove definitively that this is so true at the coastline. I shouldn't have to, because the ocean should have reseeded itself somewhere in that 60 days. We should have found. Now, Browning's Pass, outside of Browning's Pass, and I covered it for 5 days, all the islands around it, around 35 islands, I didn't find any of these sea anemones, the white ones out of the water, but there's 78 species of sea anemones, so there shouldn't be just one there. The entire coastline was literally naked except for a handful of species everywhere we went. Now this bull kelp, we only found that at the top of the island on the west coast, and then on top of it in Johnson Strait. As we go up north, we would imagine we'll see this. This stuff is very fragile. Underwater, we don't see the urchins climbing on it. Underwater looks very bad. The pictures we got, most of the kelp, the entire kelp, and everywhere we go is really sad. It's really unhealthy. There's nothing there of substance. Now, on top of this, we didn't notice insects. There's an amazing amount of insects that lives on the coastline. There's 168 residential birds. There's around 148 migratory birds that will come through and eat in the mud flats. There's nothing in there to eat. There's no smells in there. We're at best, again, we're seeing 1% to 1%. It's very hard to find that 1% to 1% species of insects or life. Now, the life itself, the kelp is what you see. It looks like there's life there, but in reality, there's 9,500 species. There's over 4 million in the ocean we only know what we identified. I only go by what's recognized through the institutions in British Columbia. So it was just this little tiny area. It was about a 300 or 400 foot strip of the coastline on each side of Browning's Passage that had the baby white sea anemones. Outside of that, I didn't see them anywhere else in 60 days. So I'll jump back to another day, and I'll take questions after that. And because I'm pretty well telling you everything you need to know in the context that we got a real issue, that it can't stop. When you think about just a plume coming over your country and it depositing it, even though you can't see it, think of it as a snowstorm, and the snow doesn't melt ever. That's how you should approach it. And that's why we need 4,300 peer-reviewed academic studies every day. I would feel a lot better if we had 4,300 peer-reviewed academic studies just once working on just food and water. But we have a way forward. And what we got to do is we have to put our resolve into this, because it looks definitively as we go up the coastline, if this continues on, and it can't not, how can it not? Because the ocean should recede itself. And so think of a snowstorm coming down on the ocean. Well, as it sinks, it takes out the most vulnerable of our ecosystem, which is the phytoplankton and the pods, because they're very tiny, they can't live in proximity to these extraordinary radioactive elements from the MOX fuel. And I basically would give anything for someone to be able to prove everything I'm saying is wrong, or even a little bit, or even one thing I'm wrong. Not only that, because that would, every time that would happen to me over the years, it would make me stronger. But right now, I just run with what I know for sure, and I don't postulate anymore. I just go out and get the data, and when you're getting all of these pictures and you're going along the coastline yourself, seeing it yourself, feeling it yourself, smelling it yourself, not having to worry about insects in the campgrounds ever, not having to worry about, or not worry about it, but not seeing any life on the coastline whatsoever, not seeing the 9,500 species, not seeing the tidal pools full of life. You should be able to go into any tidal pool, and find 400, 500, 600 species. Any tidal pool. We've never seen that on the entire shorelines. Day after day going out, and we take pictures of whatever we find. And so what's not in the picture is not there. And so when I say we find 24 species, that's what I mean. Because we have the photographic proof, and we're going to continue to go that. We've taken 2 weeks off to redo the entire operation, winterize everything. The Fukushima is not stopping. It's going to continue to hemorrhage into the ocean 1,440 minutes a day. The reactors are not in the models of the releases. They're not in the models of the dispersals. They're not in the models of the disposition of the radioactive fallout. And until that is known and talked about in taxis, supermarkets and laundromats and shopping centers, until people are talking about it, we don't have a way forward. And the way forward is simple. If you looked up in the sky and you've seen a meteoroid coming at you, you wouldn't have to pick up the phone and say, what are we going to do? Because everybody would come on board. And that's what we need to do. And that's what we're doing. And that's, thank you, George, and everybody else, John, and everybody else that is trying so hard to get the word out and has done so much energy and time and effort at their own expenses to get this word out there and understand the enormity of it and the significance of it. And you take into consideration that Dr. Raymond Gilmetty's studies on the beagle dogs and the puppies show definitively that this stuff does harm you, and that's why we have terrorist laws, and that's why we lock it all up on nuclear waste sites, right?
Hey, Dana, could you take some questions from the audience? Do we have any questions here?
Yes, please.
For Dana Durnford? Come on up to this microphone here, and you can ask Dana Durnford questions directly. How long was your survey? How many weeks was it?
Altogether, it was almost 3 full months.
Okay, but you did an earlier survey, right?
Right, that was including that one.
Yeah, and that sort of set you up for this additional, extended, more comprehensive survey. Is that right?
Right, that was what really brought it all home to me. Once I didn't say nothing to nobody during that survey. No one knew we were doing it. It was done just by me and my friend. We wanted to see definitively for ourselves if this was a pattern. And as it turned into 50 kilometers, turned into 100 kilometers, turned into 200 kilometers, and that had set my resolve that I had to go explore further now for sure. There was no way around that. I was consumed by that, and I'm still consumed by it, yes, because I understand now what I'm looking at is abnormal, and it really worries me that I can't find the normal host of the coastline, normal population. And the fact that we didn't have to clean our windshield in that 200 kilometer stretch, that was on, we only thought about that on day 8 when that struck home. And I said, we never cleaned our, there's no insects anywhere. And I couldn't believe it. Went out and checked the front of the vehicle.
T'as vu? C'est magnifique.
Absolument. 16 mégapixels, c'est magnifique.
Le mien zoome pas comme le tien. Je peux publier le tien?
Ouais, bien sûr.
Le téléphone avec l'appareil photo le plus perfectionné jamais offert par Samsung, voici le Samsung Galaxy Note 4.
Hey tout le monde!
Trop de monde, trop de mouvements, probablement trop loin. Mais grâce au Note 4, vous pouvez toujours réussir votre photo.
Regarde ça.
Le zoom numérique 8X capte chaque détail Et grâce à la stabilisation d'image optique, la photo est réussie même quand ça bouge.
C'est incroyable, ça.
L'angle de l'appareil photo avant est si grand qu'il est possible de prendre tout le monde en photo.
Tu penses que tu pourrais me l'envoyer?
Ouais, mais donne-moi ton numéro par contre, parce
Ok,
que...
ok.
Le nouveau Samsung Galaxy Note 4, avec le meilleur appareil photo jamais offert par un téléphone intelligent Samsung.
From him, and he accommodated me, and he was very cordial for the first part of it, and turned belligerent as he realized that I wasn't asking the normal questions and that I wasn't going to be put off. And I was very polite the entire time. He basically but said that there was no history of white sea anemones on Berkeley Sound, which is a huge, huge area, and they have been doing research there for 40 years and have no documentation of that. Now they do have research there of nudibranchs, and nudibranchs eat the white sea anemones too. And so that was interesting that they had that there eating, and pictures. And of course I went onto Google, and you just look at underwater photography, Berkeley Sound, and all you find is the white sea anemones, because they do stand out pre-2011. And so once again, from all the dive shows down there, the dive operations, again, people posting those videos online, it was easily to come out and really understand what they're up to, is that they're trying to hide the eradication of the marine species along the coastline. That was a pivoting moment for me, and that was, I went out there for 5 days, and we scoured that coastline, and just to try to get a picture myself, and I couldn't. Now the whole coastline itself would normally be completely loaded, once again, but for up to 500 in a square meter. So it's very visible at low tide. Your coastline is white, full of these white dots. And anytime there's rocks in front of your boat, you could see these things very clearly. Any rocks that are shallow, they will dominate every piece of it they can that is not already jostling for life. So anyway, he fabricated that. And so that was really interesting, that the director perjured their research, and that there was nothing on their website about it. So why wouldn't they study sea anemones at Banfield is an interesting question when there's 78 species on the coastline. I couldn't find anything on it outside of what was already on the net, and they couldn't eradicate. So what we done was we went over to their YouTube channel, and they haven't touched it since Fukushima. And one of the first videos I clicked on was them doing a live stream underwater showing white sea anemones on rocks. And they forgot to remove that part. So they're involved in a cover-up of our coastline, and it looks like, it's not for good purposes. Now, if the coastline was going to recede itself because the shells are missing, how come it didn't recede itself by now? Well, because the stuff that's coming over is sticking on your coastline, is sticking on your shoreline, and that would appear to be a major reason why nothing can recede itself, or the ocean has stopped its ability to produce a lot of its larvae and eggs, and that seems real too. So it's one or other or both of those. And with the radioactive fallout that was constant, ongoing all the way up to November, you're talking about as the radioactive elements go down to the water, it radiates and kills off all the phytoplankton. But then when it hits the bottom, it gets mixed up with the cold nutrients in the cold water, and it gets swept back up to the surface again.
Okay.
And so go ahead.
Okay, Dana, excuse me for interrupting. We have a questioner here from the audience, and I'm going to hand this over to him.
Yes, sir. I was just wondering if you had found any hard evidence, like debris from the Fukushima accident that's washed up on beaches in British Columbia.
Right, we did so, and we expect to find a lot of it. We did find, and we got pictures. We didn't get too close to it, and we took good pictures, and we Googled their names, and they were Japanese companies. Now, whether they came from the debris or not, it's hard to say, but there is around 2,000 square miles out there, and that keeps breaking off chunks. We do have a major amount of reports of debris washing up and filling up the coastline. I know there was quite a lot of boats that have washed up that came over from the tsunami itself. We know that ocean current will come. There was a big ship off this coastline within a year and 3 months of the accident itself that showed up and he sank it, a big trawler. And by myself, we did find 3 pieces that we identified as Japanese, were big pieces, and we suspect that they were from the tsunami debris. It's the best I can answer you definitively on that stuff, because there is no definitive unless you can contact those people.
Dana, thank you so much for your presentation, much appreciated. I have a question regarding this moving up the food chain to humans, and I have a very dear cousin that lives on Cortez Island, right off of Vancouver Island, and I'm sure they're very aware of what's going on, but what do you think is going to be coming on down the road for the humans that live exposed on those western edges of Vancouver?
Yeah, that's a tough one, that I try to avoid talking about it because the implications of what I'm talking about it's shocking. Well, the Tetra River in the late 40s, they evacuated 7,500 communities and 9,000 square miles permanently because it wasn't as radioactive as what we got here now and what we got coming and what's continuing to come. And so my opinion only is that I'm expecting we're going to have to, and I actually called for that, the evacuation of the entire coastline of the Pacific Rim nations, let alone British Columbia, Canada. Because what I've studied and what I'm researched to the point that it drove me out there for 60 days straight is the confirmation of my worst fears. And that was the confirmation of my worst fears. The ocean wasn't receding itself. And so that would mean it's here, it's in large amounts, it has already annihilated it. Now the fish and everything are further up the food chain. I expect to see them to go in the next couple of years, and I expect to see animals to disappear over the next couple of years, the majority population of them, certainly including pets. We also, because we know from all the peer-reviewed academic studies how this works. So what we're trying to do is inform everybody, give everybody a good narrative, and give everybody an ability and a way forward so we don't have panic and we don't have chaos. And my idea is, 4,300 peer-reviewed academic studies every day. Once again, if we can turn on that switch, that power, that passion that we have for solving riddles as a nation, and get rid of all of our, we have to put aside and move ahead into the future. I see a big extermination of the planet, and I don't see any way to switch it off. And I don't see anybody really coming up with solutions, but there is a solution available just in North America with that 4,300 peer review. Imagine if the other countries were to take their academics and go to work on solving these equations. But looking at the ocean, it didn't recede itself. It's missing its species. I don't need to go any further up the coastline, but I am, because I think the rest of the planet needs to see it with their own 2 eyes before they'll appreciate the things I just said, that we really truly do going to have to leave the coastline. And the studies are showing that salt is liberated from water up to 200 miles inshore. And that was pre-Fukushima, got nothing to do with radiation, but it was showing the liberation of salt. Well, the oxygen and the isotope molecules are liberated the same way. And so we expect, as it's hitting the coastline, without plumbing into the upper troposphere and lower troposphere, that's full of it, by the way, from the endless releases. But the stuff that's just hitting the coastline can still go 200 kilometers inshore. And insects are acclimated to more salt because of the salt. And that's how I figured out that study. But the same thing applies in my books to the liberation of the radioactive elements. The isotopes and the radionuclides are liberated the same kind of vector. And so we have to take that into consideration. If we're going to put anything into consideration, you have to be at least 200 miles away from where the spray itself and the fog is going. Go ahead. That's a dire, I know. That's a dire predicament. But it's real, and it's based upon factual information, not bananas or potato chips or walking in the sunshine routine, but actually on Dr. Raymond Gilmedi's Beagle 35-year experiment on dogs and puppies shows me, everybody else definitively that this stuff is real. And the reactors don't run on iodine or cesium. For every cesium, there's 100 times more strontium-90. And so the big numbers we see of cesium and iodine-131 are not including the constant releases from the other reactors or the melting of the other reactors or the 2,000 man-made ionized radiated elements that are not part of the periodic table. Nothing on this planet is acclimated to. And so we need a revolution, or an evolution, not a revolution, but an evolution, of accepting facts for what they are, even though they're invisible. You can't see it or smell it or touch it or hear it or feel it or taste it or throw rocks at it. Doesn't mean it's not real. Doesn't mean it won't give you the cancer.
I have another question. Have you received any harassment or outright threats from the government of Canada or the government of the United States?
Yeah, indirectly. See, you can. It's hard. No, not directly from governments. I don't got nothing official I can blog about. But I get an endless amount of harassment. I get an unimaginable amount of harassment, and I get an unimaginable amount of death threats. I've got a lot of phone calls. I got a lot of emails, all documentation and now documented. I've had them threaten to come and do me with a blowtorch over and over. Much worse than that. But I'm not switching off for anybody or anything. I'm going to go out. I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm just going to be taking pictures. And I happen to cover. We have 13,500 headlines. I never got to them all yet, but I covered 9,000 of them. The nuclear proctologist has in a category called chronological orders for oceans, jet streams, California, America, Canada. I think, it's just the hardcore that are coming after me and trying to scare me away. That works for a lot of people. I've dropped my weight belts at least 300 times for sea lions, and they got up in my face. And so I could never conquer that particular fear, but I always got back in the water. It's the same thing with this. It affects me the same way, but I'm not going to give it up. I know they came by and took pictures of me recently and posted on the internet in my garden, my address and everything to try to incite somebody to come and hurt me. And that's my fate. Oh, that's my fate. But if you do that to someone like myself, I think my research will just expand it to everybody could walk down. And I prefer that. If everybody would walk down a long tide and take a picture and send it to me at Dana Durnford at hotmail.com, and I can put it together and show, much more effectively than what I can do the way I'm doing it. We just winterized the boat. I'll be going by myself up the coastline, and I'll methodically, right between village to village, then we're going into the villages and the communities, and we're going to try to get on the telephone, on the radio stations, get into the media, go contact them, go interview the native communities, and actually try to have lectures in those communities and try to raise awareness. I'm tired of doing what I'm doing, so the only way for me to get it over with is to ratchet it all up.
Dana, we thank you very much for your presentation and all your hard and arduous work up there in Vancouver Island and both your surveys. And you've added greatly to the body and knowledge of information that we need to inform not only the American public, but the world at large.